We're moving into a story that I've been quite excited to look at. While I've been down here in Cape Town, I popped into the Ezekiel Art Gallery, and we'll talk about that probably tomorrow as well. But they've got an extraordinary exhibition of a variety of works, but one of the works is a work with Arabic written on it. And it is, whilst it is an artwork, what you realize is that it is actually also a religious experience. It is about talking about religion as art, if you want to look at it like that. And now the world's first Islamic art biennale is taking place. It's taking place in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia at the moment. It's a very new event, and it features a variety of African artists as well. On the line is the biennale's artistic director, Sumaya Vali. She's a South African architecture professor. She is the principal of the Counterspace Design Studio and has done a diversity of works, not just in architecture, but also working in the visual arts space as well. Sumaya, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so wonderful to be speaking on a home platform.
Oh, tell us about the Biennale. Give us the overriding picture of it, and then I want to go into the stuff that I have been intrigued by.
Yes, thank you. So, as you said, it's the world's first Islamic Arts Biennale. And for this inaugural edition, I really wanted to think about what a definition of Islamic arts is for the present and for the future. And the definitions of Islamic art that we have, of course, there is a very strong and existing canon around the world of Islamic art. But for the most part, it's been defined through aesthetic form and geography or chronology. It's a definition that started with 17th century France. And so it's very much a definition that we've inherited. And being South African, of course, these are issues that are very close to my heart, and thinking about how we imagine the world differently from our perspectives is really what my own practice is centered around. And so I really wanted to think, what is Islamic art for this age, and how is it relevant for us? How is it telling us something about our future? Our practices, both African and Islamic, you can say, are rooted in the oral, in rituals, in performance. And I wanted to think about artworks that really express this and bring these things to the Biennale. So it's a very... Yes.
Sorry, go for it.
Sorry, go. No, I was going to say it's a very different definition to Islamic art than the one that people have in their head, or the preconceived ideas that we have of Islamic art already. And I'm really honored that the artists have taken up the mantle and have taken on the theme in this way and have really expressed something differently. I believe it's going to be a contribution for the canon.
You know, what you've raised this issue of how how Islamic art was defined historically, where that came from historically, talking about its relation, of course, to geography as well as chronology. And this was what I was thinking when I popped into the museum here, the Ezekiel Museum, and I saw this work, and my apologies, I can't recall the artist's name. But what struck me was that this was, perhaps it was an artwork, but it was an artwork which was about faith. It was not necessarily an artwork which one could look at in terms of where it came from, when it was created, etc. It was an artwork about belief. And I thought that was like a very powerful, for me, it was a very powerful realization that we sometimes forget that when we look at art.
Absolutely. And I think at its heart, art, architecture, artistic practice tells us something about who we are. It affirms our place in the world. We know this as South Africans, that our built structures and our environment affirmed our places in the world in a very particular way. And so really having works that manifest our identity so that we're able to interact with them, so that they reflect us to ourselves, and we can also evolve our senses of belonging in the world, is incredibly important.
Sumaya, you mentioned architecture, art, and the like. You are an architect, and yet here you are as the artistic director of the Biennale. Talk to us about how you draw all those threads together to create the collection of work that you have put forward.
Yes, so I am first and foremost an architect, and most of my work is in the cultural sphere. So at the moment, I'm working on several library and museum projects. I'm also working on galleries and a presidential center in West Africa. And my work is very much about how our identities, especially our hybrid identities, can be expressed in architectural form. But that is it's a long-term project, and I think that we have to be able to practice at many different scales. I also teach, and I'm also a researcher, and I think that being able to work on this project as artistic director, I was able to. It's almost like doing a body of visual research where one gets to practice and think about architectural ideas, but perhaps at a smaller scale. Although the Biennale
Massive.
is quite substantial in scale, yes. But I mean artwork to artwork. So
Yeah.
we have the ability to test ideas.
You know,
And
you
also,
go for it.
sorry, just to add, also because the scale of this Biennale is so immense, the scale of the artworks is large scale and they unfold as a narrative. So there's a lot of spatial thinking. We also have juxtaposed with the artworks historic objects and archaeological finds. And the way that this plays out, I think, is very architectural. It's almost like the narrative unfolds from space to space. So I had to employ a lot of that thinking as well.
Just thinking, we were just talking to Dr. Anna Trapido and about the diversity of foods and tastes that we have in South Africa and how that is a drawing in of so many different cultures to create those different tastes. And in many ways, one can look at that closely with regards to South Africa, but you could also say, if you look at the continent, it is a drawing in of all these different tastes and ideas and images and religions and the like. And I imagine that when you then start to talk about an exhibition, which is an Islamic art exhibition, it probably has so many very, very diverse images and creations on its walls, but also in its spaces in general.
Yes, absolutely. And my practice is based in Johannesburg and
Yeah.
formed and shaped by Johannesburg, and very much interested and obsessed by how exactly what you described, how hybrid Johannesburg is, that it has embodied cultures and practices from across the continent, from across the country, and it is this incredible place of so much diversity, and there's conceptual food waiting to be translated into design form at every turn. Jeddah is actually very similar in that because of its relationship to the pilgrimage, the Hajj
Yeah.
pilgrimage, it is a place that has witnessed migrations over millennia. And it's a place that has always been, that has always absorbed cultures from around the world. And also its own culture has been transported across the world. You just described, for example, this artwork that you saw at Zico that had Arabic lettering, and that actually came from this place. So, how we think about this change and the changeover and transfer of cultures is very, very interesting. And the Biennale is very much rooted in that. So its theme is Awal Bayt, which means first house. And that's a term of reverence that's given to the Kaaba in Mecca. But we're looking in two parts. On the one hand, at the presence of the Kaaba, the presence of this place in all of our lives across the world, no matter where we are from, how we construct home and how we construct spiritual belongings through our rituals, which reference this part of the world. But then on the other hand, in the outdoor works in this Biennale, we're also thinking about how cultures from around the world have moved and traveled and
Yeah.
settled here. This place has absorbed cultures from all over into its own culture, and these are also forms of belonging. So we're thinking about all the ingredients and infrastructures of home and of community. How do we construct home after migration, after displacement? How do we carry our faith with us through our forms of community? So food, sound, forms of celebration, how people share together in loss, in worship, how do we find strength and solidarity, and what are these infrastructures of how we come together. So most of the works are actually very experiential, and all of them in the outdoor area are invitations for gatherings to happen. So for example, one of the works is called The Endless Iftar, which reflects on traditions of eating together from around the Islamic world. And it's a table that is 50 meters long. The artist has worked with traditions of eating and gathering from around the world. And that art installation actually hosts and holds gatherings. So from the beginning of the Biennale, we've had an artist reflect on lost food heritages, for example, from Palestine. We're also having an artist thinking about how grains of rice have moved and migrated over the peninsula. And over the month of Ramadan, this table will actually host the pre-fast meal and the fast break meal every evening as well.
We do need to go to a break, but just briefly, when I listen to you speak, what it feels to me as well is though it pays profound tribute to migration, and something that we need to think about deeply here in South Africa in terms of how we think of people who we do not consider to be South African, but just that idea of travel and movement and how that has happened across this continent for millennials.
Absolutely. And also, I think how generative migration is, because
exactly.
When people migrate, we exchange knowledge, we exchange culture, of course, we trade, people marry. And I think that has so much to offer to our cultures. It's almost an expansion of our worldviews. And it's been really profound to be able to work with artists who in their own geographies are hybrid. So the artist I just mentioned, for example, is Tanzanian British, and her heritage is Pakistani. So there's this continuously in many of our artists, we find that their own geographies are hybrid. My own is, of course, hybrid as well. I'm South African, born and bred. My heritage is Indian, and I practice between South Africa and the UK. And I think that this diversity of perspectives is incredibly generative, and it's powerful because it allows us to resonate with cultures beyond our own.
Sumaya Vali, she's the artistic director of the Islamic Arts Biennale, which is currently underway in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.